So speaking of violence, something that has been getting a lot of attention, both from the U.S. media and the politicians in the United States, is of course the allegations of sexual violence as a weapon of war, allegedly used by Hamas on October 7th. In fact, we actually had Hillary Clinton at an event at Columbia University at the School of International and Public Affairs called Preventing and Addressing Conflict-Related Sexual Violence. And one of the speakers at this event was actually the lead author of this major New York Times story called Screams Without Words, which was published in December, which claimed to report on how Hamas used rape as a mass weapon on October 7th. Now, the reporting was terrible. It misrepresented the main character, the main subject who was allegedly raped. Her parents didn't think she had been raped. Her parents said that the reporter had misrepresented the story. They quoted people whose stories changed. These are not people who accuse, I'm talking about witnesses. It was so shoddily done that the New York Times decided to shelve a podcast they were going to do on the Daily. They're going to do a story on this story. But here's Hillary Clinton talking about what happened when she was so rudely interrupted by protesters.
Use of sexual violence in conflict was especially horrendous. I teach now at Columbia at the School of International and Public Affairs, and we had an event. We had two events last week. We had 3 panels about Ukraine, and they were superb. They went off without a hitch. We learned a lot and were challenged. 2 days later, we had panels on conflict-related sexual violence. It included Ukraine, Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Israel. And it was protested. You just have to ask yourself how you could have an event focused on using rape as a tactic of war against women and girls, which is in conflict across the world, and you include the most recent horrendous example out of Israel, and that brings out the protesters. So there is an invidious strain of anti-Semitism that has never gone away, but we had hopes. It had been certainly submerged, that has been poking its head up for quite some time now.
Okay, so first of all, Hillary Clinton's husband and political partner, more women have accused him of rape than have accused Hamas of rape. I have to make that point. The point must be made. It's kind of obscene that she's up there talking about violence against women and girls when she was such a hawk and oversaw so much war. And as she knows, because she loves saying that women's rights are human rights, as she knows, women and girls are disproportionately harmed in war. She also talk about weaponizing rape. She helped spread the rumor about Gaddafi giving Viagra to his forces so they would go and rape people. And of course, she helped overthrow Gaddafi, who himself, if you want to talk about weaponizing sexual violence, was sodomized to death in an overthrow supported by the United States and NATO. And now they're open air slave markets in Libya. So she's the last person who should be talking about any of this. And I think it's disgusting. And I think it's disgusting that this New York Times reporter felt comfortable. But it kind of speaks to how much the media and the political elites protect each other.
Well, during that same event, Gettleman, the New York Times reporter, said something to the effect of, because all this criticism came out even from his own in newsroom. I mean, you saw the Intercept report,
right,
that you cited, where they refused to publish the podcast based on the story because the evidence was shoddy. And and did you hear how Gettleman defended himself on that panel? He said something to the effect of, "My role as a journalist is not to analyze the evidence."
I don't want to even use the word evidence, because evidence is almost like a legal term that suggests you're trying to prove an allegation or prove a case in court. That's not my role.
Actually, I think Amira Haas put it the best when she said the role of a journalist is to monitor the centers of power. That's the role of the journalist, because the centers of power can do things behind closed doors, and they have the right to use the force. They have a monopoly on the use of force. Those are the people that need to be monitored. Okay, if the role of a journalist is not to analyze evidence and try and understand what's true and what's false, then I don't know what the role of a journalist is. Apparently, you know, you're not supposed to assess whether or not your sources have repeated, have changed their version of the story 3 times, right? That, you know, one of the lead witnesses in the Gettleman story is Raz Cohen, this Israeli who went on October 7th, published videos of himself kind of having a good time at the festival, hiding in a ditch. He had
Yeah.
he had 2 interviews on October 8th. Or no, sorry, 2 interviews on October 9th. Okay. No mention of rape. On October 9th, he never saw any rape. One would expect that the interview the day after, right, his memories would be fresh. He
Right.
just witnessed mass rape. You'd think it would have come up. No mention. On October 10th, all of a sudden in his 3rd public interview, he saw, quote, many women raped. And then he changes his story again on December 19th. Now he just saw 1 woman raped. And then the New York Times article, which comes out on December 28th, of course, fails to mention that the guy changed his story 4 times and just reports the fact that he witnessed mass rape. I mean, the journalistic, I don't know what the right word is, but you're publishing a blockbuster story about an ongoing genocide, and these mass rape allegations are being used and exploited to make it easier for that country to continue to kill innocent Palestinian kids.
Yeah.
And you don't even have the journalistic integrity to mention that your sources are changing their stories 4 times.
Or that the parents of the main subject, I mean, of course you won't have that integrity because the type of journalist who would do that wouldn't admit it. This is really propaganda atrocity. I mean, people have died and will continue to die in part because of that story. Because I've heard so many people refer to it
Right. It's a
when
litany, right?
justifying Israel.
Oh, when they raped us and they murdered us, right? So
Yeah.
it's part of this narrative, and it's actually a key piece of it. You have historians that write about this, that rape is one of the things that is
Yeah.
used to justify violence. Is they raped us, so we're
Right.
going to carry out these horrible acts of violence. This is consistent across time and space. I mean, what makes, I think, this whole a story so, I mean, ridiculous is that, you know, there has been an ongoing campaign that this is a manufactured story, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't that journalists started piecing together these different shards of evidence. No. That is not how this story came about. This was manufactured in the hallways of the Israeli military propaganda machine. And
Right.
you saw Max Blumenthal's tweet where he shows the side by side. You have like the Guardian piece and the New York Times piece where they're literally plagiarizing. It's like, wait, he's like, there's no way the Guardian plagiarized like 2 full sentences from the New York Times. Like,
Right.
that seems highly unlikely. In fact, what is much more likely is that they're both quoting word for word from the same Israeli propaganda dossier, right? So in fact, it's a manufactured evidence. The witnesses are curated. The story is presented to journalists as fact. And if you look at, I think the best, as far as I can tell, because, you know, there's so much has been written about this and so much analysis, and it's like, how do you how do you really get at the source of the truth? Because, right, these are very serious allegations. I mean, recall that the allegations are, by the way, rape was used systematically.
Exactly.
Right? That's the allegation, that mass rape. So we're talking, what does mass mean? Dozens? I don't know.
Right.
And it was not just, there were not just dozens of rapes, but it was used intentionally as a
Right.
weapon of
As-
war.
right.
That is the allegation, which, I mean, the fact that, first of all, the only real evidence, even the fact that I wouldn't even call it evidence, the only real, even semi-credible allegations that there was sexual violence at all was from the festival. It was not from the kibbutzim. It was not from Be'eri. It was not from these other places. It was basically almost all of the most credible. I wouldn't even call them credible. They're like, someone heard, like, the most credible evidence we have is someone an Israeli in a ditch heard someone say, I'm being raped. But we don't have victims. There's no forensic evidence. And if you look at but again, the argument is that it was rape
Systemic.
was systemic.
Yeah.
But again, what we know about the Hamas attack on October 7th was that it was extremely unlikely they were aware that there was a festival going on.
Right.
The festival, first of all, that location was only determined a week in advance, whereas the Hamas raid had been planned for probably
Right.
probably years. So that's number one. And then they changed the location 2 days before. So it's almost, I mean, I think it's incredibly unlikely they had any idea there was a festival there. So
Yeah.
and that was the only place where there was any even alleged rape. So to claim that it was systematic, I think is
Right.
honestly just being incredibly dishonest with the facts. But then I've been trying to get at this because you have respectable people claiming. I mean, respectable people, the Guardian, the New York Times, right? But even mainstream analysts, citing this as respectable, claims that this is quite likely happen. I think the most comprehensive assessment I've ever seen is produced by a website called the website is called oct7factcheck.com. And it's an incredible, it's basically a Notion document where they've tried to gather all of the evidence. It's thousands and thousands of words, and it'll take you hours to actually read. And if you want to actually follow up on all the claims, you got to click on all the links and
Right.
read. But it's the conclusion. If you don't mind me reading the conclusion,
Yeah, sure. Of course.
this is what they conclude. And honestly, I really do think this is a very serious, honest effort. I mean, anyone can go and look this up themselves. This is the conclusion. Quote, sexual assault committed either by militants or civilians from Gaza likely occurred, primarily at the site of the Nova Festival and surrounding area, according to eyewitness accounts. But as of December 4th, 2024, this remains unconfirmed as Israeli investigators have failed to match a single eyewitness account to a body matching its description. They failed to produce any forensic evidence. They failed to interview a single survivor. So beyond that, claims that rape was used, quote, systematically as an intentional, deliberate, widespread weapon of war remain unfounded. Sources claiming this rely primarily on people taken as Israeli prisoners on October 7th.
Right. And
where
tortured.
torture is probable, leading at least one human rights organization disregards those videos as valid evidence.
Right.
And it goes on. But basically, was there some amount of sexual assault that took place? That would not surprise me. But again, that's unconfirmed. We don't know that.
Right. Right.
But was there systematic mass rape? That is fiction. That is atrocity propaganda. And it's being used to justify the slaughter of tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians.
What's interesting is that there, surprise, surprise, seems to be a bit of a double standard when it comes to allegations of sexual assault and rape, because it turns out that the UN Human Rights Agency says it received reports of rights violations against Palestinian women and girls in Gaza and the occupied West Bank since October 7th. And I'm reading a report from the UN Human Rights Agency. They say, we are particularly distressed by reports that Palestinian women and girls in detention have also been subjected to multiple forms of sexual assault, such as being stripped naked and searched by male Israeli army officers. At least 2 female Palestinian detainees were reportedly raped, while others were reportedly threatened with rape and sexual violence. Photos of women detainees in degrading circumstances were also reportedly taken by the Israeli army and uploaded online. In addition to allegations of sexual assault and rape, there are reports of women and girls being denied menstruation pads, food and medicine, and severely beaten. Furthermore, on at least one occasion, Palestinian women detained in Gaza were allegedly kept in a cage in the rain and cold without food. And there were reports of arbitrary executions. So let's take a look at the way the State Department reacts to allegations made against Israelis committing rape versus allegations made against Palestinians committing rape. And here's Matthew Miller of the State Department.
I cannot independently confirm the reports. I will say that we have been clear that civilians and detained individuals must be treated humanely and in accordance with international humanitarian law. We strongly urge Israel to thoroughly and transparently investigate credible allegations, ensure any accountability for abuses and violations, and that will continue to be our position.
That was in response to the more recent reports from the UN Human Rights Agency about Palestinian women and girl victims. Now here's Matthew Miller responding to the allegations about Hamas on October 7th.
Reports that Hamas has committed sexual violence, they've committed rape. We have no reason at all to doubt those reports. When you look at all of the atrocities that Hamas carried out on October 7th and the atrocities that they have carried out since, the fact that they continue to hold women hostages, the fact that they continue to hold children hostages, the fact that it seems one of the reasons they don't want to turn women over that they've been holding hostage, and the reason this pause fell apart is they don't want those women to be able to talk about what happened to them during their time in custody. Certainly, there is very little that I would put beyond Hamas when it comes to its treatment of civilians, and particularly its treatment of women.
The United States is a case study in how to dehumanize an entire population, millions and millions of Palestinians. I mean, the way that Israeli violence is described and the way that Palestinian violence is described, who is considered a trustworthy source, whose numbers are accepted. We all recall when Joe Biden explicitly challenged and questioned the numbers coming out of the Gaza Health Ministry, when it's the United States government that relies on those numbers.
Right.
Whatever it is, whether it's the
Which
hostages,
they now love calling Hamas-controlled health ministry. Yeah.
right? Even like Haaretz calls it the Hamas-controlled like health ministry. I'm like, do you call it the PA-controlled health ministry in
Yeah,
the West
right.
Bank, like,
Or the Likud-controlled health ministry in Israel?
it's just dehumanization is what it is. And we're seeing it regardless of the issue, right? It could be when Hamas kills 700 some Israeli civilians, right? The words used, the emotive
Right.
language used to describe these people are the most evil, vicious people that have ever walked on planet Earth. You know, the unspeakable cruelties, and then when the Israeli government says we're going to annihilate the people of Gaza, and you have every single Israeli minister, the prime minister himself, the president, when they all say we're going to annihilate Gaza, and then they proceed to annihilate Gaza and kill 30,000 Palestinians. Oh, well, they're acting in self-defense.
Right.
And
Israel has the right to protect itself.
when it comes to the hostages, yeah, you have now you have 130 hostages. 100 days after the passing of October 7th, Joe Biden issues a statement, 331 words long. We feel for the pain of the hostage families. Rightly so. Great statement. What about the 3,400 Palestinian hostages, who are, by the way, also hostages because they were taken without being told why they were taken? They're called administrative detainees, right? But they're taken without being told why they're taken. They can be held indefinitely. Their detention is renewable indefinitely. They haven't been charged with anything. They're hostages. But because they're Palestinian hostages rather than Israeli hostages, even though there are 32 times as many of them, we don't even know they exist. There's no statements issued by Joe Biden on the 100-day anniversary of October 7th. No calls. He doesn't meet with the families of the Palestinian hostages. You don't even so much have a statement from an American official, even condemning what the Israeli government is doing. So it's just total dehumanization. It's a case study for generations to come. I think when you talk about how to dehumanize people and how to make genocide possible, the United States government officials, Joe Biden, Anthony Blinken, these press secretaries, their statements will be cited in history books as case studies of how you dehumanize an entire group of people.